I'll launch into my opening remarks. So it is really great to be here today to discuss the potential role of standards and guidelines in MSD prevention in Ontario. This is a really important topic, one that's really important to us in the new Prevention Office in the Ministry of Labour, and I'm really glad to be here to provide a few opening remarks. I'm doing this on behalf of our Chief Prevention Officer, George Gritsiotis, who really wanted to be here but cannot today. George sends his best wishes for a successful workshop, and he, like the rest of us at Prevention, are really interested in what comes out of this and what we'll be doing to move forward on prevention of musculoskeletal disorders in workplaces in Ontario. One of the issues that I think doesn't get enough attention in workplaces is musculoskeletal disorders. We don't hear very much about this in the news. We hear about Senate spending scandals and closed gasoline plants, and those dominate the headlines day to day. But, you know, I actually think that MSD should get a lot more attention than they do. For starters, they certainly cost more than those things financially. If anyone looked at the numbers, there's way more money lost every year through MSDs in terms of work that's lost, or the WSIB costs of dealing with claims and all that related to MSD. It seems to me that's a huge problem that really needs a lot more attention. And the other thing I think is interesting about injuries to muscles, tendons, ligaments, and nerves that develop from ergonomic risk factors such as repetitive, forceful, or awkward moments, which I understand is the definition of musculoskeletal disorders, that these are almost always preventable. This is a great opportunity for us in the Prevention Office to go at an issue and really try to prevent something bad from happening by acting now. Yet, despite the fact that they're preventable, they're very prevalent, and when anyone looks at the data, you cannot help but be struck by just how common these are and how big a part of occupational health and safety injuries these represent. In 2011, there were nearly 20,000 claims at WSIB related to MSDs, nearly 45% of all injury claims. That's actually not down very much. Prior to the global economic recession in 2008, MSD-related claims are 49% of WSIB claims, so they've always been a very high percentage of claims. But when we took a deeper look at the data, and this is one of the things I like to do to try to understand things better, it's not like this is an issue in just one specific part of the workplace in Ontario. It goes across age groups, it goes across occupational groups, it goes across industrial sectors, it applies to both genders. This is a really common and prevalent issue, and I think that speaks to why we need to look at better ways of addressing it. For example, when we look at the data, there are some interesting facts that come out of it. By age, they're most prevalent among 45 to 49-year-old workers, so people just a little bit younger than me. But what that tells you is because those are older workers that are a little bit longer in their career, it's probably the long-term effect of what they're doing in the workplace has caused a lot of these injuries. By gender, we find that male workers are more affected by them. Don't quote me on this, but I think the gender gap on this is narrowing a little bit, something I want to dig into, but certainly I want to look into that a little bit more. They're actually the most common in the services sector, which might not be surprising because the service sector is a bigger proportion of the economy. But you know, we think of occupational health and safety injuries as occurring mostly in places like manufacturing and construction. These are very prevalent in services, so I don't think by any step of the imagination we should think of services as necessarily being safe. The leading occupation where they tend to occur is among motor vehicle and transit drivers, which I found to be quite an interesting fact, but then after having spent some time driving on a summer vacation, you know, after you get out after a long day in the car and everything's stiff and sore, I actually stopped to think, what about people who do that every day? Somebody who gets in a truck or a bus or a van and drives every day, all day, I could imagine the long-term effects of that are not trivial. When we look into what causes MSDs, we find that the most likely cause of sprains and strains is overexertion, which I don't think is terribly surprising. And one of the things we find is that the part of the body that's most affected is the lower back, but don't think of this as purely being about back injuries. I'm sure a lot of you know it's any part of the body, depending on what kind of job people are in or how they might have injured themselves. It could be anything from literally from the top of your head to the tip of your toes. Could have been some sort of musculoskeletal disorder that arose in the workplace. When I look at all these figures, and as we move forward in the Prevention Office on our strategy on occupational health and safety, I can't be helped but think that if we really want to make an impact, if there's a really big problem out there we want to go at, and certainly we're about identifying these really big issues to go at, MSDs is a really good place to start. We've got a lot of big issues out there. It's a very common issue. It's an important one. And I think it's an area where we're going to be spending a fair bit of time and focus in the Prevention Office in the Ministry of Labour. For example, recently I've been spending a lot of time doing consultations on an integrated system-wide occupational health and safety strategy. We've got a couple of hundred submissions on the strategy. We've had about 60 public meetings, met with almost 1,200 people on the strategy, and MSDs came up a lot. It actually usually came up under the discussion of how we look at high hazard activities. We just asked a few questions. How do we look at high hazard activities? And there really isn't a consensus on this. The tough question is, do we look at severity or do we look at frequency? And those are really, really tough questions to answer, and I don't think we'll ever really answer them. I think in its simplest form, the question here comes down to, how many bad backs is equal to a human life, and I can't answer that. I don't think anybody actually can. But what I think we did come away with is that we should look at issues that are both very severe and issues that are very frequent. And MSDs can fall into both of those. They're certainly very frequent, and some of them are very severe. So I think what we're hearing in our strategy development talks about one of the places it will inevitably steer us towards is more work on musculoskeletal disorders. And certainly, again, the benefits of prevention are quite obvious there. When I looked at the agenda, oh, it's gone. When I looked at the agenda for this workshop, though, there were really three things about it that I thought were terrific and why I'm really glad to be here today and really glad this is coming together. The three things about it that were really, I think, interesting and important were this. First of all, that it is about MSDs, which we recognize as a very big issue we need to address to move forward in occupational health and safety. The second thing I thought was really interesting is that it's about standards. There's a very, very wide consensus out there. We hear a lot in prevention. We heard this back in the 2010 Expert Advisory Panel report. Standards are very important. They're critically important as a way of getting really clear guidelines and a clear understanding in the workplace about what it is you need to do to prevent something from happening. We're very big on standards development in the Ministry of Labour. Some of my colleagues in our training and safety programs branch who are responsible for standards development are here today to participate in the session. I'm sure that side of the Prevention Office will really come away with an improved understanding of things that we can do to help move this forward. The third thing I thought was interesting, and this is a little selfish on my behalf, is the role of occupational health and research and what it can do to help make things better. That's part of my job in the Prevention Office, is oversight of occupational health and safety research. And when we looked at the agenda today, I thought this is a really good example about how this can and should work. For example, as we took over oversight of occupational health and safety research effective last April, we've been trying to find our way forward on this, basically build on the good things that were happening in Ontario already under WSIB oversight and seeing what we can do to make it better. So one of the things we did is we got together a wide range of stakeholders and people from the research community and system partners and service providers on a research day that ended up being on Valentine's Day, not a happy choice in a lot of our lives, but so it was. And people came together on that day and started talking about the role of research and what we can do to move things forward. Out of that day, there was a pretty broad consensus about our way forward on occupational health and safety research. We heard that research needs to be independent, it needs to be objective, it has to have good science. Those are all absolutely fundamental for research to work. We also heard that it has to focus on workplace application. This was really, really important that came out of the discussion. I think this is one of the areas where we're going to really work to move forward. How do we get good stuff that happens in research into workplaces? We heard that partnership is important, that we should actually work in research with people, not just other researchers, but which is a good thing to do. We should work with employers, we should work with workers, we should work with all the workplace parties, system partners, anyone we can to help it make a difference. And we also heard that research should focus on our priorities that we're going to develop as part of our strategy that is well in progress in the Prevention Office. So we have a pretty clear idea about where we're actually going to go on occupational health and research in Ontario, and we're going to be announcing plans very soon. I don't know, Richard, Susan, the email make it around yet? I guess not. We're sending out an email probably today to announce our plans as we go forward on occupational health and safety in the province. What we're going to do to make sure that the good work of organizations like CRE-MSD continue and how they can continue to lead to workplace improvement. So we're really excited about that. So, when I talk about those three things, are really exciting, that drew me to the conference today. I thought this is a really good example of what we're really after, though, when it comes to research. We have experts here from the research community, a session really put together by our colleagues, our partners at CRE-MSD, to bring together people, health and safety experts across the room here, to see what we can do to move this thing forward. This is great. This is exactly the kind of thing we want to see, and this is exactly the kind of thing we want to see more of in the Prevention Office. So thank you to the people who put this together, and thank you to all of you for participating today. While I'm at it, I'd like to say a few words about the Center of Research Expertise for the Prevention of Musculoskeletal Disorders at the University of Waterloo, or as I used to refer to it, the second best university in Waterloo, Ontario. Okay, I spent a little time at the one down the road. This was when I first met Richard, I could immediately see why the University of Waterloo was a natural place for this, with their strength in areas like engineering and kinesiology and other areas of science that make this a great place to get the synergies together to work on MSDs. And I think it's great that we have a center like CRE-MSD set up to look at these particular issues. A lot of you may be pretty familiar, I hope you are, with the work of the center, but if you're not, I think it's well worth taking a look at what they do, because they really cover the entire waterfront of MSDs, all the way from, at one end they have this intensive laboratory-based studies of what happens in terms of cell and tissue disorders that are the underlying causes of MSDs, all the way down to, what do we do in the workplace to help make it better. And I think that the fact that they span that entire waterfront of research, all the way from the basic research to the workplace application, and also work a lot on knowledge transfer like we're doing here today, I think really speaks well of the work of the organization. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of CRE-MSD, there is a new brochure in your packages here that I suggest you take a look at. It will tell you more about the organization, what its role is, some of its success stories, some of the things that they're doing and thinking of looking at. I think it's a great source of information on the organization, and I encourage you all to look at it. Even better, assuming that there are enough copies, take them, pass them around to other people in the workplace. The more people that are aware of the good work that's happening in places like CRE-MSD, the more people can think about how we can leverage this research into making workplace improvements. This is what we really want to do. So, please learn more about the organization and think more about what it can do to help in workplaces, or help in whatever your role is in health and safety. Those are the kinds of things we're looking for. So I guess in conclusion, I'd say at the Prevention Office, we're very excited by the transformation of the occupational health and safety system that is going on in Ontario. We're moving forward on a wide number of fronts. We're into our second full year in the Prevention Office in the Ministry of Labour. The organization has been stood up, and we're starting to deliver on our priorities pretty regularly, which is very exciting to be part of this. Our marching orders came out of the 2010 Expert Advisory Panel report, which some of you may be aware of. It spells out a really ambitious, really exciting vision for occupational health and safety in the province of Ontario, and we're really starting to finally get moving forward on that now that we're in place in the ministry. As part of this system, we in the Prevention Office are looking forward to working with health and safety experts like yourselves, with organizations like CRE-MSD, to move forward on where we go in the strategy to make the province a safer and healthier place for people to work. That's really what we're all about. So with that, I'll turn it over to John, and thank you very much for being a kind, patient, and forgiving of my tardiness audience. Thank you.